Hi, I'm Steve Addison, and this is the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Well, today we're going to talk to a practitioner who we'll call Les, and we're going to talk about what it takes to get to NoPlaceLeft. Les, how did you get started in this game of pursuing movements of disciples and churches?
There's two factors in my life. One was actually my grandfather, who saw a movement of God in East Africa and Tanzania, and he was a missionary there back from the 70s through the 80s, and an early movement where the valley went from a handful of 10, 12 believers, and then by the time his ministry was finished and he was leaving, there were about 500,000 in the valley where he was. And so seeing those things, I think, prepared my heart for being able to have faith by sight in some ways, of seeing people raised from the dead, seeing thousands come to faith in a short period of time, so that when it came my time to step into the field in North Africa, into the harvest fields there, God had already done that work in my childhood, as I'd been able to observe my grandfather's ministry and work, and seeing God's mighty movement of his Spirit in a place that would have been very dark, full of the occult and witch doctors and just demonic presence, all kinds of practices that would have just been, prior to that movement, just been rampant in that valley where he was working. But I think another thing was coming to the field. We arrived on the field in 2006, having done some work in church planting in the U.S., but recognizing that what we saw in planting a church with multiple small groups in a city in North America was not adequate to even keep up with population growth. And just the stark reality of the people group that we were pursuing a movement amongst was 9 million. And at least the dialect we were working with was 9 million. And it was just in an area the size of the state of Maine in North America, size of England, in the UK. So it was just absolutely overwhelming to think, okay, how are we going to see these people reached? And I think that desperation caused us to just fall on our knees, just daily praying and praying and praying, so that by the time we were 18 months in to our time there, having gotten language and a culture acquisition, we went to a training. The training was done by somebody who had been trained by Bill Smith and Steve Smith in the Singapore Training Center. Both of the training leaders had been trained there, and we came in, and it was we were our first studying Luke 10, and at the same time, Allison, my wife, and I were in our Bible reading. We were reading John 4. And so John 4 and Luke 10, those two harvest fields passages, praying to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest field. And then John 4, you say 4 months and then the harvest, but I say the harvest is white right now. And it's like the Holy Spirit enlivened our hearts to know that we were stepping into a harvest season. So that the rest of the training, we were we felt like we were feasting, just taking in all of the things that we needed to learn, and really coming up with plans that we could immediately implement. And our commitment was, we had been doing sort of a tea time Bible, chronological Bible storying set for about 18 months with a group of 5 to 8 people. And so we made a commitment that we would share the complete gospel, which we hadn't gotten to in 18 months of chronological sharing, within 24 hours of returning to our field from the training. And we did that. We called together these 5 that we felt like were the ones that we wanted to share the gospel with first. And we shared it in a Creation to Christ, about a 10-minute presentation of the gospel. And all of them said that they wanted to enter into covenant to follow Jesus Christ and him only. And I said, just let me make sure that you understand this. And so I start share the whole thing over again. And they're like, yeah, we want to. So what do we need to do? And I said, well, we need to pray a prayer. And they said, well, since this is a covenant prayer, shouldn't we stand and lay our hands open so that we can make a proper covenant? And I said, oh, yes. So already they were teaching me enculturation. They were teaching me how to indigenize it. And I think that was one thing that immediately God in his mercy began teaching us, is to immediately open our eyes and trust that our nationals, whether they're brand new believers in the next moments, or they're people that are walking alongside us for years in the movement, that we need to trust them and trust the Holy Spirit in them to teach us how we need to set patterns. I think the other thing that God taught us very quickly was we led them through the covenant prayer, and then the other thing was, I said, so, and in the language that we were working in, there's a lot of ways to equivocate. And so I said, if it's possible, maybe if you're able to, if it's not too hard for you, would you be willing to share with maybe 1 or 2 people this week? And the least educated woman in the room said, I can already think of 5 or 10. Is it okay if I share with more? And the Holy Spirit just punched me and said, don't you ever underestimate the power of the Spirit in my people. And I think that was God's mercy for me early to begin to have more confidence in the Spirit of God among the people of God. I think that's one of the things that if I were to say, please learn from my mistakes, that would be one of the things I would really encourage people who were seeking to be movement practitioners, is trust the Holy Spirit in yourself and in the people of God, and especially the empowerment of the Spirit of God in new believers. They have such underutilized potential. I think that it's not to say that they don't need encouragement and guidance, and that there isn't a role for an older believer to guide them along. But the Spirit's power is so evident in them as they grow. And I don't want anyone who is seeking to be a movement practitioner to quench what the Spirit is doing through their own lack of faith. So that was off and running from there. Especially that woman, she shared constantly with everyone. She would take different taxi routes to be able to find new people on the taxi routes, on the bus lines, so that she could find new people to share with. And so she led a lot of people to faith, but she didn't seem to be able to disciple them or gather them into groups. And so we realized that we needed to start pairing her up with a guy that wasn't great at evangelism, but was really good at remembering the basic lessons, the milk lesson set that we were training, and being able to get other people to remember them and multiply them. And so I would go occasionally and listen to how he would teach the lessons, and then I would take notes. And then in any groups that I was leading or my wife was leading, we would make the adjustments to the way that he did it, because it was so clear that he was gifted in making it sticky for the culture, so that it would be passed on to multiple generations. Eventually, he was somebody that paired a song to each of the milk lesson sets. And so there was a song that was in the local style of music, and became ways that people worshiped and ways that people remembered the order of the song, of the lessons and their content. So that was something that was in place within the first 6 to 9 months of our time. There were some other barriers that we came across. Right around 6 months, we had a huge wave of persecution. And it was at a time where we had to leave the country. My wife was giving birth, and the medical care in the country wasn't adequate for my wife's needs. And so we had to leave, and that's when the first huge wave of persecution came through. One of our key leaders.
What did that persecution look like?
It looked like there was the woman who was our big evangelist was forced into a marriage with an unbeliever. There was 2 of our leaders lost their jobs, and simultaneously to losing their jobs were kicked out of their homes. Another leader tried to share with his supervisor at work, and the supervisor picked up a piece of rebar to hit him over the head, and he lifted up his forearm, and it shattered both bones in his forearm. So I mean, those were some of the things that happened in that time. There were successive waves of persecution, but I think this first one was all of a sudden and without us. That made it hard for us to hear when we were away. We got an email, and that was all. There wasn't any other form of communication at that point in time, long distance. And so all we could do was pray and reach out to prayer partners to ask for prayer coverage. There wasn't even any way that we could send in other colleagues from other parts of the country to come and help. So they endured that persecution on their own and weathered it well. There were definitely our sister that was such an incredible evangelist. She had a lot more restrictions on her life, and her evangelism was curtailed. And so there was, in many ways, we felt like the evil one had done a good job of crushing her voice and at least diminishing it. And that was hard. That was an early thing that was, we saw such hope in the numbers of people that she was sharing with and bringing to faith. So, yeah. I think there were.
What happened next?
Yeah, go ahead.
What happened next?
When we returned, one of the things that was a big, so we had learned the importance of the word for covenant. The people were Semitic, and so they had a deep understanding of the word covenant. To call somebody to belief wasn't sufficient. I think that's important. That I would encourage people who are cross-cultural workers to look for the deepest word for commitment in the culture that they're going to, because there's an assent to belief that isn't a declaration of following our Savior. That in many cultures, do you believe this? Yeah, I believe it, and I'll add it to my pantheon. I believe it, and I assent that it's one of the things that could be true. Isn't enough. But when you say, would you covenant? Would you come under the covering of Christ's headship of your life? That's what in this culture covenanting meant. And so when we would ask people to follow that, to make a covenant, they were immediately, they would say, nope, I'm going to follow this saint or that saint or this angel or this other thing. And I'm not going to exclusively follow Christ. And so even in the refusal to follow Christ and the refusal to the invitation, we knew that we were on the right track as far as calling people to exclusivity of following Christ. But this culture was a Christian background culture. And so they were, when we called people to baptism, that was an entirely different question. So even though we had baptism in our milk discipleship lesson set, there were people that would say, when we get to the point where we would say, so how are you going to obey this lesson? They would say, well, if we have any converts from the majority culture, then we will baptize them. We'll continue to baptize our babies, because of course that's what it means. I'm like, no, that's not what this lesson means. This is believers' baptism. So that was something that was a definite challenge. Without baptism, there can't be formation of church. And so one day, about a year in, we had over 1,500 people that had come to faith, and only about 25 had followed in baptism. And so I was sitting there on my porch one morning, having my quiet time, and we had a guard that tended the garden and did other things for us. And he was a strong believer, and he had actually been trained to become a priest in this Christian background culture. And he sees me, and all of a sudden I just feel this overwhelming sense of grief that the church isn't being formed among the people. That there are lots and lots of people coming to faith and even being discipled, but there isn't the church being formed. And I start to weep. And he walks over to me and he says, "Brother, why are you weeping?" And I share with him, and he said, "Well, let us. This is what we should do. We should pray together, and then we should study the word together." And so we did that. And over the next throughout the day, we just looked at different passages, and he said, "Okay, I know exactly what we need to do to change the discipleship lesson on baptism." And I said, "Okay, he said, but I have to go to night class. I'm a student. He was a student, and it was time for him to end his shift and go to night school. And so he left, and he said, I'll bring you the lesson tomorrow, which was great because the next day I had a group that was on the discipleship lesson on baptism. And so he came back and he says, here's the lesson. I looked at it, and he had added 4 sentences to the beginning of it. And then he had added the precedent of in Acts 19 of the Ephesians 12 that are rebaptized. Mm-hmm. So they were baptized in the repentance baptism of John, and then they're rebaptized once they have a saving knowledge of Christ by the Apostle Paul. So he had added that, and then he had added the birth narrative from Luke. Mm. So at the 8th day, according to the custom or the covenant of Moses, Christ was circumcised. And on the 40th day after birth, his mother cleansed herself of the birth blood by offering the proper sacrifices according to the law of Moses. And then Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. And when he was 30 years old, he was baptized in the Jordan River. Mm. I said, okay, that's all you want to add to this lesson? Okay. So I went and I shared the lesson, and I asked the 7 young men who were in that discipleship group, what do you need to do to obey this lesson? And they said, we've got to go be baptized right now. Wow. That's like, really? And that was something which right around that time we had enough leaders that were multiplying groups that we had started to do training about every 6 months of these leaders, because they were starting to get burned out after about 6 months of intense ministry. And we realized they needed a time to pull away, to reflect. We called it a mid-level training retreat. And because we had that, we could reintroduce this new baptism lesson into all those various leaders and into their streams. And in every one of them, we saw the same results. Baptism began to be the norm rather than the exception. So that was about a year, around a year and a quarter in to the beginning of movement, was when we started to see churches begin to form. It was an ancient church that had followed infant baptism all along. And so they became a huge part of the persecution of people. They would deny you can't be buried here anymore. You can't, you are not participate. You're not able to participate in the local farmers cooperatives. So you can't buy fertilizer because you were rebaptized. So there was a lot of persecution that came through that. The other thing that did happen, however, is as people were baptized and as they were obedient in baptism, persecution would increase and miraculous expressions of the Spirit of God would increase, which I found very interesting. There would be far more numbers of demons cast out. Mm-hmm. There would be, at one point, the believers in one community, one farming community, had all of their crops burned, and it was just the believers. And no one, the local police were called, and they didn't really do anything. And there was a particular elder of this village who was the one who was kind of heading up the persecution. And he had the largest land holdings. And around that time, a massive hailstorm came through and decimated his field. It's like you could draw a line, just his field. You could draw a line around the edge of where the fields had been hurt, and right next door there would be somebody, and there hadn't even been one head of grain that had been knocked off by the hail.
So an amazing coincidence.
Yes. And he recognized it, and he came and said, pray for me, for I have sinned, and he who is in you is more powerful than he who is in me. So they shared the gospel with him, and he actually had a couple of demons in him that they cast out. And the other thing is that the valley next door had a bumper crop, heard that their brothers in the valley next to them had their crops burned, and they brought over out of their abundance. And so the families that had their crops burned had plenty to eat that year, despite the fact that they had gone through persecution. So even that brought unity across between two communities of believers as they heard about one another's need and shared everything in common. Yeah, I mean, those are there's so many more stories. One of my favorites is this was another. It's actually another people group that we were prayer trekking through an area. This was a high mountain area, and we'd been praying for this area to have the gospel move forward in it. And it was like every time we would try to even get into the area, there would be some kind of barrier. But this time we were able to go through with a volunteer group who was praying with us. We came to the edge of this little village, and this girl was playing a flute for her goats. She stops playing. She's like, "Would you come to my house for a coffee ceremony?" And so we said, "Oh, sure." This other woman comes running out and says, "No, some of you come to my house." So we were a sizable group, and so we said, "Sure." So I sent my national partner and translator with the first shepherd girl, and then I went with this other one. We went into her house. And my experience was, okay, this is exactly not a person of peace. So she's giving us this coffee ceremony, and she's like takes about 5 or 6 coffee beans and roasts them on the little griddle, and then she's gives us just a tiny handful of popped grain to go with it, and it's this weak coffee. And I start looking for an opportunity to share the gospel, and finally I'm just saying, so this is why we have come, is to tell you this story. And I share the story, creation to Christ, all the way through, and I say, so what do you think you need to do to obey this story? She says, we need to pray to Muhammad 5 times a day, and that's what we need to do. So so she said, I was like, well, that's actually not what you're supposed to do to obey. Not only was her hospitality not lavish, but it was like the neighbor came in, the cow stepped on the foot of the volunteer as we're going into the house, and he's in pain from that. And the chickens come into the house and start squawking and crowing and going crazy. It's like everything was not allowing the gospel to move forward. Meanwhile, and we say thank you, and we walk out of the house, and the woman says, "Oh, you forgot to pay me for the coffee ceremony," which is in that culture an absolute insult. Like, you never ask anyone to pay for coffee, especially if you have invited them over to your house. So we did, and then we said, this is definitely shaking the dust off of our feet moment in this house, at least. So we went to we made our way through the village to find where the others had gone, and we arrive, and just as we arrive, the head of the household, as we enter into the house, says to this little 4-year-old boy, "Isa, shoo the calf out of the house so it doesn't disturb our guests." In this area, there's enough wild animals that they sleep with their animals in the house, especially young ones, so that the animals don't eat them. So the 4-year-old boy takes this little stick and shoos the calf out of the house. Well, of course, we pick up on that, especially my partner and translator picks up on that, and he says, "So I noticed that you named your son Isa. Why did you name him Isa? That's not a very usual name in this part of the country." And he said, "Before you share with me what God has sent you here to share with me, let me tell you a story." Okay. 4 years ago, my wife was very pregnant, and in a vision, a man came to me in white and said to me, "I am Isa. One day I will send to you someone from across the ocean to tell you my story. Believe that man. And as a sign to you that this is true, your wife will give birth tonight. It will be a son. Name that son after me." And then he said, "Why did it take you 4 years to come to me?" And so we immediately shared the story of the gospel with him. As soon as we were done sharing, all 9 adults in the household stood up and said, "What must we do to be saved?" Mm-hmm. The contrast in the hospitality was also stark. In this part of the country, there's a table that is hand carved out of one piece of wood for a wedding present, and you only bring that out to serve your most honored guests. Well, he had brought that out. The main cash crop in that area was honey. It's famous for its honey. And so he served not just a little bit of honey on your hand that you would lick off, but like a bowl that overflowed onto fresh baked bread. And it was lavish hospitality. And so, I mean, that contrast alone showed us that they were not only just receiving the message, but also receiving us as messengers. So we shared some basic stories with them, encouraged them in their faith and how to share the gospel. But we already had an arrangement in another village about 6-hour hike away to get there that night. And this was a village that was a Christian background village that was actually having a feud with the village that we were in, where this man whose son's name was Isa was living. We'll call him Abba Yassim. Abba Yassim said, "Please come soon. Please come again soon. I want to know more." And so we said we promised we would, but we had this appointment in another village, which was this Orthodox background, Christian background village. So we arrive after dark, and the man who had come to faith in that village actually had been led to faith by his son. His son was somebody that had come to the city where we lived about 10 hours away, 4 or 5 hour hike plus another 6-hour drive from there. He had come for a training, and So we had trained him over the course of this. It had been about a 6-month course in ecology, and he was going to become a scout in a new national park that was forming. That 6 months of training, he had learned all the lessons. He had multiplied himself and formed groups that had become churches. And so when he went back to his father in this mountain area, he led his father to faith and his brothers to faith. And his father was a chief village elder and had led about 180 people in that village to faith. And we'll call him Michael. So Michael had, as soon as he had come to faith, he'd asked God to stop the feud between his village and the Muslim village. And he'd been praying for a year. So we go into the village that night and we share the news that in the Muslim village that there were new believers. And he said, finally, God has answered my prayer, that there would be an opportunity and that we could have peace and that the gospel would go forward to them. He said, so how are they going to learn the lessons from the scriptures, the lessons about how to follow our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? And we said, well, actually, he has no sons who can read. So we have been praying about how we might encourage him in that. And Michael went from being joyful to being somewhat dejected. We do some discipleship lessons and encouragement with them. And about midnight, we're about ready to go to bed. And Michael says, I have an answer. I have 3 sons who can read. One of them, David, I will take him and he will become Abba Yassim's son. So the next morning we wake up at 5 a.m., hike back over the mountain 6 hours to Abba Yassim's village, and these 2 brothers greet each other, brand new in the faith, and Michael says to Abba Yassim, "This is your new son." And so David moved that day and began living with Abba Yassim and in his house and training respectfully, teaching Abba Yassim's household about how to follow their faith and all of the discipleship lessons. The thing is that we didn't know, this was a very poor village, and they didn't have enough money to pay for a cleric for their 8 mosques. And so they did Friday preaching by committee, and the village elders would choose who was going to share whatever they wanted to share that week. Well, Abba Yassim said, well, I'm the head of the committee. I'll take it for the next few months. And everybody's like, great, good job. You go. So whatever David taught him, he would teach at Friday prayers. 6 months later, on a different visit, there had been a couple of visits in between, but 6 months later, I come in, and in this village, there was a natural amphitheater. And the people would come out on this time. They said, so we're going to just have you teach everybody. Really? You want me to teach everybody? So everybody was on the hillside, and I was sharing a story and from the basic discipleship set, just proclaiming it up the hillside to hundreds of people sitting in the hillside. And I would hear all this whispering. And I said to one of my national partners, can you go see what they're saying? And so he came back to me and he said, actually all the stories that you're saying, they are finishing the stories before you do. They know them all. And so obviously they had done an incredible job of sharing. But on that particular visit, this woman comes up to me, and I recognize her as the one who had given me the worst coffee ceremony of my life. And she says, can you please come back to my house? I would like to give you a proper coffee ceremony. And it wasn't just a coffee ceremony. She laid out a feast for us. And she said to me in that, she said, you came to me and you tried to share something with me, but I could not hear it. But when Abba Yassim preached that same thing in the Jesus Mosque, I could understand it for him. And I think that's I have never seen something so clearly displayed of the reason that you stay with the man of peace, so that out from the man of peace, the whole community can come to faith. That is the pattern that God has set for entering into a new place, finding the household of peace, and through that household of peace, everyone else has access in a way that they wouldn't have access through you as the outsider.
How did your role change from when you first arrived to when you ultimately transitioned out? How did it look different?
It changed actually rather quickly. The opportunities, it was a harvest season. And so everywhere we looked, we turned, every time we shared there, you could, so our predecessors, people who had been working in that part of the world before, might have 200 shares of the gospel and get maybe one yellow light response. I'm interested. We were seeing, so as a foreigner, I might see 1 in 20 come to faith. But national partners were seeing up to 1 in 5 come to faith that they were sharing with. So it meant that very quickly we needed to move towards leadership development, especially as national partners were being faithful in sharing. We were not looking at doing we always shared and we always tried to start new groups that would become churches, but it was very quickly, especially as we saw one of our main national partners. This was one of those things where I can't encourage workers enough to prepare ahead of time for the importance of investing in leaders. It's like we come and we're so longing for that first believer, that first group of disciples, that first church, that we forget to look down the road to the need to quickly pass off that leadership and support that leadership, to move into a supporting of leadership role. There was a young man who had, at one point, he was doing 23 groups, and he would do them on a 2-week rotation, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, over the course of a couple of weeks. And he came to me one day and he just said, "I'm done. I quit. I'm done. It's too much. I can't do it anymore." And of course, we had been writing our prayer letters back about what God was doing through this young man. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've been rejoicing in all that God's doing through this young man, but I have not been caring for him. And I also haven't been coaching him in his releasing of leadership. And so that was a big lesson for us. We immediately took him, myself and another young man that was a single guy that was a partner with us on our team. We went away for a weekend and just gave him a chance to sleep the first day, because he'd been he'd been answering all these questions that people had and staying up late at night. And so we just let him sleep. We spent time in the Word and singing and praising God and praying over the next 3 days. And then on the third day, we were able to come and say, okay, what is God's vision? What does God want to do? And we prayed, and he really opened up a plan for us in how to hand off leadership in those 23 groups. In the end, we only lost 2 of the groups, but that was a really good lesson for me. Is we had to shift our emphasis to focusing on that leadership development and encouragement. And so 3 days a week in our house, we had kind of open lunch for those that were leaders, and they would show up, and sometimes they would stay all afternoon. And then we, by the end, we were doing about every 4 months, we would take a leader through a mid-level training, which would be between 3 and 5 days. And there, within every 4 to 6 months, we were running through about 750 to 1,000 leaders through mid-level trainings. And they, underneath them, in order to come, they had to have 4 generations under them. And so I actually, more often than not, towards the end, they would be like, why is the white guy in the room? They would be 14. I met an 18th generation from me, which is great. The last time that I was, the last training that I did, I showed up. Let me back the story up a second. One of the things that we had been praying for was, with the leaders was, I wanted them to have a sense of the immensity of the Great Commission. And so I said we should start praying for the Middle East and for the deserts of North Africa, areas that just have so little access to the gospel. And so we started praying for those places. And one night in a mid-level training, we were praying, and it was about 5 hours of prayer that they were praying for the lost among other people groups and other nations. A year later, I showed up, and they said, here they are. Here, who are? These are the 26 young men and women that we want to send to those people. And they all have visas, work visas to go to those countries. They all have passports. We have paid for the passports. Now you train them in how to do it. That was an amazing answer to prayer. And I wish I could say that all 26 did great. There were a lot of lessons to learn there about things that didn't go well. Those that went and did well were able to have circumstances where they were able to stay together. So there were 4 young women that went and served as nannies in a single household, and they were able to lead all of the women in that wealthy household to faith because they prayed for healing from breast cancer for the matriarch of that household, and she was healed. And then she said, well, who is this Jesus that you prayed in the name of? And she and all of her daughters and her daughter-in-laws all came to faith and never made the transfer to the male side of that household, as far as I know. Another one was a group of 6 men that went into a work camp, construction work camp, and they were able to lead Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and others from other parts of the world to faith in that work camp. So we have an ongoing relationship, but they've completely embraced the mission themselves. they have it, and so we are looking to where else should we go.